Hello, my name is Alonza Cruse, and today I will be addressing some of the inspectional activities that we have been working on in this post-pandemic world. But before I jump into that, let me first explain the reorganization that ORA is going through. The new ORA model significantly impacts the human and animal foods program. However, there is still a significant impact to ORA's pharmaceutical drug program and the other medical product programs to be complete, in that our compliance functions and personnel will be transferring to our respective program centers. For the human and animal drug program, that will be to the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research and to the Center for Veterinary Medicines. Aligning inspectional resources with the centers and program priorities, our inspectorate officers and staffs will carry out inspections and other field-related activities for their individual portfolios. The Office of Pharmaceutical Quality Operations will be renamed as the Office of Human and Animal Drug Inspectorate. Go on and scan the QR code you see on the screen to get additional details regarding ORA's transition directly from FDA's website. Let me give a little history, or rather a timeline, on some of the activities that we have done since the onset of this public health emergency. On March 13, 2020, FDA initially suspended all on-site inspections. Those inspections that we continue to perform were those that were deemed mission critical to the agency. And early on, they dealt a lot with COVID-related activities, whether it was through inspections for respirators or for therapies associated with COVID-19. Routine foreign inspection trips resumed for us back in April 2022. We resumed trips to China earlier this year in May 2023. And throughout the entirety of the public health emergency, we continue to use alternative tools such as remote regulatory assessments. Were used when we could not get to an in-person inspection because of travel restrictions, or it was just not deemed mission critical for that in-person activity. Let me now take some time to talk a little bit about some of the work we did throughout. Some of the inspectional related activities that continued included our work with PICS, bilateral information sharing, and records requests in advance or in lieu of inspections. Also, during the time of the public health emergency, we developed a remote interactive evaluation tool that allowed us to, in addition to using tools of records request, work with facilities to have an in-video spotlight of manufacturing operations to assist in making those decisions the agency needed to make. We have and continue to be actively engaged with the Pharmaceutical Inspectorate Cooperation Scheme, PICS. This worldwide membership of some 54 participating medicines authorities includes well over 2,000 inspectors. This has allowed us to continue our work with our foreign regulatory counterparts, not only to work with them in developing harmonized standards and inspectorate tools and procedures, but also in the interpretation of GMP standard. This is critically important to help us strategically build not only collective trust, but to build capacity for the inspectorates really on a global scale. ORA also supported and supports bilateral information sharing with our foreign counterparts to gain a more universal understanding of the activities and the regulatory oversight that these countries pursue. There is no doubt that inspections are critical to FDA's oversight of pharmaceutical products. Though I should note that it's important that inspections are just one part of a robust, multi-pronged approach to overseeing safety and quality of FDA-regulated products using some of these various tools. Now, looking specifically at Remote Regulatory Assessment Tool, the agency uses RRAs when we determine that this tool would be an appropriate step in assessing compliance with FDA regulations. Through RRAs, we have and continue to assist us in assessing compliance with manufacturing processes, possibly to enable a firm to make corrective actions prior to our next physical inspection, to assess the adequacy of corrective actions taken in response to either previous inspections of complaints, which may lend to an increased time between FDA inspections, and certainly the use of an RRA may allow us to do that. If appropriate, to make decisions related to applications submitted to the agency without the need to conduct a pre-approval or other inspection. Now, we will continue to use these alternative tools to supplement physical inspections and the review of drug applications to assist the agency in making timely decisions on the status of facilities and the various products that they manufacture. Let me speak now for a few minutes to the work that we have done and have expanded within the mutual recognition agreement space. In 2017, FDA entered into a mutual recognition agreement with the EU. By mid-2019, all of the EU member states were assessed and found capable in their CGMP inspection portfolios. Since 2018, FDA has been requesting, reviewing, and classifying inspection reports from our MRA partners for sites assigned within our site selection model. In 2021, the U.S. entered into an individual MRA with the UK following their exit from the European Union. Of importance to note, during the public health emergency, we were really thinking creatively about how can we expand our partner network and the work that they're doing to help us in making some of the decisions that the agency had to make. So in 2021, a third country inspection assessment was done to expand the scope of MRA beyond just the United States and the EU. Essentially, it allowed the inspections that the EU member states have done outside of the EU to provide those inspections to the agency. It did greatly enhance, open up, if you will, more inspectional information that we were able to gather, and those inspections that we did outside of the U.S. to share with our EU member partners. We have now classified those inspections conducted by our MRA partners in third countries. Again, these are inspections that are conducted outside of the EU by EU member partners. Continuing the work that we have done in the MRA space, in July of 2023, the MRA, we now have a mutual recognition agreement with Swissmedic. In continuing expanding the work within the mutual recognition framework, over the past few months, we have taken numerous steps in preparing for expanding the MRA yet again. When the MRA was first implemented, it included pharmaceutical drugs for humans. The MRA now includes veterinary medicines as part of the portfolio within the MRA with the EU. There are about 16 EU member countries that are capable of the veterinary products and veterinary drugs as part of the MRA EU, and is greatly enhancing our ability to expand our network of inspectional activity within the pharmaceutical landscape. As you can see on this chart, it provides from FY18 to FY22 the MRA inspections that we have classified by fiscal year. You will note the red showing up in FY21. That is when we began in earnest of reviewing third country MRA reports. That number did go down slightly in FY22 as we began increasing the number of foreign inspections that we have been doing at FDA over that time. But our uses of third country MRA will continue in this post-pandemic world. Okay, so what can industry do? Certainly, I think ensure timely responses to the agency's request will greatly assist the work that we're doing. Ensure that the information that is submitted to us is accurate, complete, and updated, including registrations, submissions such as the Form 356H. Critically important. If there is, or if a company becomes aware of a disruption in either a supply chain or a supply of drugs produced at your facility, please reach out and contact the drug shortages staff immediately. They will help assist and navigate you through whatever regulatory challenges you may be facing as a result of the supply chain disruptions. And certainly, when utilizing contract manufacturers, have defined and established and documented activities to highlight and to demonstrate and show to them that you're taking GMP and compliance very seriously. It'll be important and will lead to fewer headaches down the line. Some final thoughts. ORA continues to serve as the agency's front line to ensure safety and effectiveness of products. We have resumed all foreign routine inspection travel, and that is important because we know that there is a significant amount of work to do, not only in the domestic space for human and animal drugs, but on that foreign space as well. ORA is making some transformative changes to enhance not only its efficiency and effectiveness, but we are continuing our enterprise-wide organizational changes to support program centers focused on inspectional activities. Thank you.
Good afternoon and happy Halloween, everybody. My name is Chris Downey, and I'm the Director of the Division of Biotechnology Manufacturing in CDER's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. And today I'm going to give an overview of the pre-license inspection process for biologics, and hopefully I can convey some of the unique considerations for these inspections and provide you with some examples of challenges we have encountered along the way. So one area that we see inexperienced and smaller companies that are developing biologics run into problems is that they treat CMC development the same way that they might treat small molecule products or generics development. But biologics are not just big small molecules. The products are more complex and more heterogeneous, and their critical quality attributes are highly dependent on the manufacturing process. And many of the process parameters and controls are based on small scale studies. And because of these complexities, process characterization, process validation, and process control are critical, and they also make pre-license inspections more complicated than many smaller or newer firms might be expecting if their experience is more in the small molecule realm. So here's just a quick overview of an example therapeutic protein manufacturing process going from the expression system through drug substance and through a final sterile drug product. And I'm doing this just to highlight in one handy visual reference for you the various ICH guidelines that apply to the different operations that our reviewers and inspectors rely on. So with this complexity for biologics come differing regulations and different expectations than from small molecules. And the first thing that I want to highlight here, because I think it can be a cause of problems on pre-license inspections, is that unlike small molecules where process performance qualification must be complete before commercial distribution, but may not necessarily be complete when the NDA or ANDA is submitted, for a large molecule, these validation activities must be completed when the BLA is submitted and the data are included in the application. And this means that inspectors on a pre-license inspection expect to see the final, what will soon be, hopefully if it's approved, commercial process and not a process in development. And I think this is a disconnect sometimes where inexperienced firms run into challenges because they're still getting their commercial process ready, but the inspectors are there and they're expecting to see the process ready to go and being performed as it will be performed after approval. Another area I want to highlight is that biologic processes rely on information that is sometimes overlooked, or at least let's call it underlooked, by applicants and facilities as they're preparing for inspections. And this includes small scale data demonstrating things like viral clearance, shipping validation data, and protocols for reuse of materials like chromatography resins. Inspectors also evaluate risk from other products that are manufactured on shared equipment. For example, I've seen cases where a firm could receive an observation if the product that's under investigation is expressed in mammalian cells and is manufactured on shared equipment with a different product that's also expressed from mammalian cells, and that other product testing and controls do not conform to the virus control testing described in ICH Q5A. In other words, they're not testing for adventitious viruses in process. So even if the subject of the BLA product is conforming to ICH Q5A and has the expected testing, because it's on shared equipment with the non-conforming product, due to the increased risk of cross-contamination, there could still be a citation as part of the PLI. So when preparing for inspections, companies need to take this kind of supporting information into account and understand that it may be examined on the inspection in addition to the manufacturing operations and QC lab activities that are described in the BLA application. All right, so to step back for a second, you might be wondering why we do pre-license inspections. Why isn't it enough to simply certify that the facility has been evaluated in the past and is GMP compliant? And I think some of that is sort of self-evident from the unique considerations we've been discussing, but it's also true that PLIs are a statutory and regulatory requirement. So for your reference, I've listed some of the applicable rules and regulations around why we conduct PLIs here so that they're available if people want to look at them. Some key items to consider when preparing to submit a BLA include that all facilities in the application need to be registered with the FDA. Additionally, when submitting the BLA, you should provide a preliminary manufacturing schedule for both the drug substance and the drug product. And bear in mind when submitting that the facilities will need to be manufacturing the product during the BLA review cycle. It doesn't do any good if it's manufactured afterwards and we can't conduct a BLI. It's also important to understand that type 2 DMFs are typically not allowed for BLAs other than, for example, the small molecule component of an antibody drug conjugate. The BLA process is expected to be described in the BLA, and the applicant is expected to have knowledge and control over all aspects. And finally, I want to highlight, because I get questions about this a lot, How are biosimilar inspections different than other biologics inspections? And really the answer is they're not. Biosimilars are subject to the same rules and regulations and the same pre-license inspections as originator BLAs. So because of the distinct requirements and risks with biologics, it's important to consider how PLIs are distinct from cGMP surveillance inspections. I think the most basic difference is that a PLI is a product-specific and process-specific evaluation, and a PLI observes the application product as it is being manufactured. Another important difference is that PLIs are led by CDER staff who are biotechnology reviewers. In other words, the inspection staff come from the same divisions that are reviewing the CMC modules of the application, and they are specialists in biotech, and they are knowledgeable of the specific items in the application. And finally, a PLI is linked to the application review process. And this means that acceptable outcomes for both the application assessment and the inspections are required for approval. And this is true even if facility observations do not lead to a formal compliance action from the agency. If a facility is found not to be ready to support commercial manufacture of the specific product that we are evaluating in PLI, the application may still not be approved, even if there's not a formal warning letter or something like that. So diving in a little bit on how pre-license inspections work, PLIs use a systems-based approach to evaluate GMP readiness for BLA manufacture, and that covers 6 systems. Those systems are the product quality system of the establishment, the facilities and the equipment, the control and handling of raw materials, naturally the production system, packaging and labeling if applicable, and the laboratory control system. The PLA also evaluates the conformance of the process and the associated controls and supporting data with those in the application. You'd be surprised how often we see that the firm is doing something differently than what is listed in the BLA, or that there are whole processing steps being used that are absent from the application. So it's important to get on the same page between the facility and the applicant. And finally, there's an evaluation of data integrity and security. The FDA must be able to rely on the data generated at a facility and to know that those data are auditable and traceable. And it's important to understand that this includes not only the production data or the QC lab data, but also the supportive information we've discussed earlier, things like data that go into the virus clearance study. Some additional key items to consider for PLIs. As we'll see in the upcoming slides, the best thing you can do to avoid problems on inspections is to have a robust quality system in place. And this means that things like deviations, out of specification, or other nonconformances are promptly investigated and root causes are identified and corrective actions taken when needed. Additionally, a good quality system proactively identifies problems and takes corrective actions. It does not merely react to and justify problems. So let me give you an example. Hypothetical, but let's say it's inspired by real life events. Let's say we have one firm that detects a bioburden excursion, but they promptly identify the organism, they identify the source of ingress, correct that problem, look for other similar potential sources of contamination elsewhere in the process, and they also look at other processes in their facilities that might have similar risks. And then subsequent batches made thereafter no longer have the problem. And you compare that to another firm that has a bioburden excursion, and they basically rationalize that even though they had a CFU level beyond their control limit, the measured value is probably too low to be a big risk to patients, and there's filtration steps later in the process that'll probably clear it. So they think they can release the batch, but they take no further actions. And then as we're looking, we see additional excursions on later batches. Which of these facilities do you think is going to have a better outcome on the inspection? Or for that matter, which of these is going to have fewer other kinds of problems? So this leads to another theme, which is we're investigating that the process is under control. For example, are the procedures and equipment in place sufficient to prevent contamination, or is the firm relying on detectability alone? And finally, it's important to understand that for biologics, the applicant must have knowledge and control over the process and the product. So we may ask to evaluate quality agreements between facilities and applicants to make sure that the applicant is really in control of the process. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, to illustrate the importance of inspection readiness in biologics development, here is the result of a recent informal survey of deficiencies listed in complete response letters. So this was looking back over a 3-year period and covered 32 total BLAs, including 15 biosimilars. An application may have more than one deficiency and may have been subject to multiple evaluation cycles, so the same BLA may fall into multiple buckets here. Note that the most common deficiencies were facility related, and non-facility related CMC issues were actually just as common as those related to clinical or clinical related information. In addition, for biosimilars, facility deficiencies were more common than those related to demonstrating biosimilarity to the reference product. And I think this highlights that CMC development and selecting and preparing facilities to be ready for commercial manufacture are not areas to neglect or to put on the back burner when developing biologics. All right, so unpacking the inspection-related CR items a little further, we surveyed the underlying 43 observations and categorized them as well. And once again, there can be multiple issues for one application, and things can fall into more than one bucket. So as you can see, the most common issues are under the general category of quality oversight. Things like the firm is not consistently or sufficiently investigating deviations or out of specifications, or those investigations are untimely, things like that. In addition, they may have insufficient change management procedures. It's another common problem with quality oversight. Other commonly occurring issues are related to procedures and controls for low bioburden and aseptic processing. And again, I think this highlights the importance of being ready for inspection when the BLA is submitted. If a company is relying on FDA to find problems on the PLI and then take corrective actions during the cycle, you have to understand that those corrective actions often take time to implement and need data to support their effectiveness, and often result in an additional inspection. And the additional inspection would have to occur during the next review cycle. So all of these things can pose a risk to a first cycle approval, and it's better to be ready for prime time when the BLA is submitted. All right, so in summary, successful development of biologics includes ensuring that the manufacturing facilities are ready for commercial production and that they are ready for commercial production when the BLA is submitted. For biologics, facility and inspection-related issues have actually been the most common reason for CR in recent years. So again, it's not an area to neglect. Common biologics inspection issues include aseptic procedures, contamination, or cross-contamination controls, and environmental monitoring. And again, a recurring theme was insufficient quality oversight, the lack of thoroughness or timeliness of investigations and corrective actions. So just for reference, I've included a list of guidance and other resources that we rely on in preparing for and carrying out inspections. One thing I wanted to highlight is, even though we don't formally enforce the EU GMP annex, I think it's current and has a lot of useful information regarding expectations for manufacture of sterile products and aseptic processing. So I think companies who conform with that guidance are better positioned for pre-license inspections, even though we don't formally enforce it. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and move on to questions. And again, happy Halloween, everybody.
Thank you for the great presentations. We'll give our panelists a moment to attach their mics and activate their video option. And as a reminder, as we move into the Q&A panel, if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions into the Q&A chat pod, please do so now. As a reminder, please remember to indicate the speaker to whom the question is being addressed, and we'll answer as many questions as time allows. All right, looks like we have one panelist up on camera, and we'll give just a moment for our other panelists to arrive on camera. All right, there we are. And we have both panelists on camera, and we'll direct the first set of questions to Mr. Alonza Cruse. And here is the first question. Which one is more efficient, is a more efficient facility inspection, in person or remote? And moving forward, will FDA utilize more remote inspections?
Okay, thank you for that question. And it's one that we have asked ourselves internally quite often in terms of which is more effective, a remote assessment or an in-person facility, in-person facility inspection. And I think each time we come up with the in-person facility inspection as the more efficient activity for the intended purpose of that of the inspection. With regards to continuing to use remote regulatory assessments as a tool, that will continue. One thing I want to draw attention to is that FDA had the authority prior to the public health emergency to use remote regulatory assessments or the records request as far back as 2012. So it's something the pandemic helped us to certainly utilize at a higher degree, but it's something that we will continue to use moving forward to help us when we can't get to a physical location for any number of reasons. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for responding. We have a few more questions for Alonza Cruse, and here is the next question. Is there any work happening for MRA with Health Canada?
Canada and Mexico are two of our largest trading partners. We do have both bi and trilateral meetings with both countries, and we have active exchange of information, inspectional, health, and others back and forth. Outside of my office, there are evaluation as to whether or not we extend mutual recognition agreements, not only to Canada, but other countries potentially as well. So that work is continuing. But again, we maintain a very healthy exchange of information and relationships with Health Canada.
Thank you for responding to that question. We do have one final question in this round for Alonza Cruse. It's kind of long, so we can repeat it if you need to. And here is the question. What happens when different regulators classify the same inspection differently? And also, what are the downstream implications of those different conclusions? And a final 3-question in one, this third part of this is, will it affect the applications in the US but not in the EU?
Okay, thank you for that question. Very intriguing. Let me start off by saying that when we are conducting an inspection in the US, or for that matter, when we are conducting an inspection overseas, we are using our compliance programs and filtering that through the laws through which FDA governs itself. So we're making that assessment not based on the foreign governments or foreign countries' rules and regulations, but those for approvability or compliance with FD&C, with the FD&C Act or other relevant guidelines. So I think the second part of that question is, probably the first question asked was, how
how do we react when we classify at the same site a foreign regulator and a U.S. regulator reaches different conclusions as a result of the inspection. And again, it goes back to what I mentioned before. We are both analyzing and filtering with the applicable laws relative to our country or our regulatory body. And there may be instances in which there are differences. A general GMP inspection at FDA is systems based, and the systems we may be doing an inspection on may be different from what a foreign regulator is, but there are any number of reasons why an ultimate final classification might be different. Again, we're basing those classifications on our respective regulatory frameworks. And I think there was a third part to the question, if you don't mind repeating it.
Certainly be happy to. And the last part is, will it affect the applications in the US but not in the EU?
Okay, so again, we are using, going back to now strictly MRA perspective, in which we did not conduct an inspection, yet it is a site that has an application pending before us. And we would be looking at and evaluating their inspection report in terms of what they found and what factors they considered significant. And the FDA would make, again, its decision based on the regulations promulgated by the FDA. And those would be some of the factors that we would use in determining approvability of that particular application. Again, an inspection is just one aspect of the approvability process. And thank you for the question.
Thank you for responding to those questions. Moving on to our next panelist, we've got a few questions that came in for Dr. Christopher Downey, and here's the first question. They're asking for further clarification on inspection finding of facilities. Is this a poor design of aseptic areas or insufficient maintenance of process areas? Can you shed some light on that?
Yes, thank you for the question. The short answer is both. It pertains to, we certainly see issues with the poor design of aseptic areas, but we've also seen issues with utilities, for example, with water sourcing or water purification, things like that. So it's both.
Thank you for responding to that question. All right. We're moving on to the next one. We've got one that's addressed to Alonzo and Chris. So we'll bring in Dr. Downey first, and then you can pass over to Alonzo to see if he has any continuing thoughts on the following question. Given the complexity of large molecule processes, would remote inspections ever be considered for PLIs?
Yes, we consider remote inspections for PLIs. During the COVID pandemic, that was a tool that we were able to use in certain cases and learned a lot from. So as part of our decision making now, we do consider facility risk based on for example, the inspection history of the facility, the novelty or complexity of the process, any application specific concerns, and we make an assessment as to whether we could cover the residual risk, for example, using a document request via the Section 704A4 of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, or if we could cover it using a remote interactive evaluation. So that is part of our decision process as to how to achieve our objectives. I would add to that we have access to information the facility might, so we don't really consider requests from companies to do remote evaluations, but that is a tool that is available to us that we do consider as part of our strategy for how we manage our inspections. Thanks.
Thank you for responding to that question. Alonza Cruse, did you want to shed any light on that?
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say complete response. I don't have anything else to add.
Thank you so much. Moving on to our next question for Christopher Downey. And Dr. Downey, here's the next questions. Can you elaborate on the expectations that the product be in production during a PLI?
Yes, thank you for the question. That's a tricky one. So in general, it means that the product that's the subject of the BLA is being manufactured in the area and on the equipment that is described in the BLA. In general, we don't consider, looking at a different process area that's making the same product that's not yet ready for the BLA, for example, or not yet submitted, or surrogate products. So again, typically the expectation would be it's manufacturing the subject product of the BLA in the subject suite or line that's described in the BLA in the facility that's listed in the BLA, and that would be during the PLI period, and that would be occurring during the review of the application. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that. We do have one more question here on PLIs, and it's the following question for Dr. Downey. Are PLIs pre-announced or might they be unannounced?
Thank you again for the question. PLIs are pre-announced typically. I think the most recent PDUFA Act had a commitment to try to see if we can announce 60 days in advance, which I've always found kind of an interesting thing to ask, because it's known that PLIs are part of the process. So in a sense, you could say I'm announcing it right now. Like if you submit a BLA, you're likely to be subjected to a pre-license inspection. So it's the timing is generally worked out with the applicant initially, and then we communicate directly with the firm. But they're never a surprise. The timing is based on, because we observe the product in production, it's based on when they're manufacturing. So the company knows when they're manufacturing, when we've asked when we might be able to come, and then we communicate with the facility to work out logistics. So there's quite a bit of knowledge in advance, and they're not surprises. The facilities should be prepared. Thank you.
Thank you for responding to that group of questions. Moving back to our first panelist, Alonza Cruse, we do have a few more questions that just came in, and here's the first question. Are there any plans for applying RRAs to cGMP inspections within the U.S.?
Yes, thank you for the question. I know it seems like we are using remote regulatory assessments exclusively internationally, but we have used them domestically. One of the earlier questions I had was which was more efficient and effective or better use. I forget how it was exactly phrased. And the physical inspection gives us all of the factors we're looking for into trying to make that cGMP assessment of the operating manufacturing facilities. Since domestically we can generally get to those places a lot easier, the percentage of time in which we would use an RRA would be minimum when compared to international travel, just due to other challenges associated with foreign travel, and if there are other advisories or other things preventing travel, or health warnings preventing travel to a particular part of the country. Thanks for that question.
Thank you for responding. And speaking of safety and traveling, we do have another question regarding that for Mr. Cruse. And can you speak to the agency's thought concerning safety of inspections in countries such as China?
Okay. Again, thank you for the question. Safety of our staff first and foremost is paramount. We took a lot of steps early on in the public health emergency to further ensure safety, and certainly continue to do so. For this audience, one of the many things that we look to is to the State Department and State Department guidance and warnings of particular challenges in traveling to particular parts of the country. We have resumed routine inspections in the country of China. As you may know, it was very difficult to travel in and around the country due to restrictions based on COVID. As of May of this year, we have resumed a more normal return to inspections in countries. That's including a staff that's located in the Foreign Office in Beijing, as well as staff traveling from the U.S. So we are resuming, slowly ramping up our inspectional activities within country. Let me also mention, because it's really top of mind on the news with the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Immediately upon hearing what was going on, there were a number of sites that we had to postpone travel to those particular facilities at this time because of the risk of travel in and around Israel. But outside of Israel and China, we're making these assessments on almost every foreign trip that we are going to, and making sure that we can provide the investigators can be safe while they're within country. Again, thank you for that question.
Thank you for responding to that question. And we do have just 1 minute, an opportunity for one more question for you, Mr. Cruse. And here's the question. Since you are in a MRA process with the EU, why are you conducting foreign inspections in Europe?
Okay, again, another great question. The MRA is intended, obviously, one of the main factors is reduced duplication of efforts within our respective inspectorates. It does not, there are inspections that, and it pertains to surveillance GMP inspections. There are going to be times in which we are responding to some signals we may have heard about, responding to complaints of injury or illness, maybe responding to a for-cause assignment in country. There are certain types that may fall outside of the scope of that. Now, if it is a inspectional activity that the EU member country can readily do for us, we may extend that reach for them to do those inspections. But the MRA wasn't solely intended just to prevent inspections within our respective countries. And the EU member countries have and continue to still at times conduct inspections within the US. Again, but thank you for asking that question.
And that's all the time we have for questions in our Q&A panel. A huge thank you to our presenters for answering numerous questions that came in. This takes us right into our break until 2 p.m. Eastern. Please enjoy your break.